Hi, I'm Lulu Garcia Navarro, host of Weekend Edition Sunday and the podcast Up First from NPR News. And I am joined today by journalist Maria Ressa. She is the co-founder of the independent news site Rappler, a prominent news outlet in the Philippines. She is a crusader for freedom of the press, which has earned her the ire of President Rodrigo Duterte, whose government has convicted Ms. Ressa this month of cyber libel after a year-long trial. She's out on bail, but I am pleased and I must say honored to welcome her here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Lulu. Thanks for having me.
You face up to 6 years in prison, but you can still appeal the decision. I'd like to first ask you how you're feeling right now.
You know, I've gone through the whole range of emotions. And after, where do I go? Where do I start? I mean, really, I'm angry, and then I'm sad. I'm just deeply sad that this is where we are today as a nation. But beyond that, I am just determined that this is not going to intimidate me, that I'm going to call it out and to kind of demand better. We're definitely appealing. But in terms of what you said, 6 years, well, look, I have 8 criminal charges against me.
I was about to say.
Together, the maximum, if you put all the jail sentences together, it's almost 100 years. So I think I've been living in this upside down world for 4 years now. I keep hoping that I'll wake up.
I want to refresh people's memory here just about when this all started. You caught Duterte's attention because of a tweet, as I understand it, which seems very 2020, even though this was much earlier. But also a lot of deep investigative work because of Duterte's war on drugs. Remind me of the work that you had been doing when this all started.
So the tweet was a response to President Duterte's attack against us during his State of the Nation address. So he didn't attack us at a random press conference. It was his State of the Nation address in 2017. But part of the reason, I think what's happened to us is happening to you in the United States, right? What happened first is in 2016, we challenged impunity. President Duterte took office in May. Within hours of taking his oath, the first deaths in the drug war, this very brutal drug war, which our Commission on Human Rights says has killed at least 27,000 people. The police themselves admit that it is nearer to about 7,000 or 8,000 people. Regardless, the first casualty in our battle for truth is the number of people killed. How can we not know that, right? So we challenged this. We did an impunity series. The government kept changing the numbers, and we kept reminding them of what they actually said. And the second level of impunity that we challenged is our government's propaganda war and the enabler impunity of Facebook in the Philippines, because Facebook essentially is our internet. 100% of Filipinos on the internet are on Facebook. We did these series. We did a propaganda war series. That was in October. The first was called Weaponizing the Internet. The second of this 3-part series was how Facebook algorithms impact democracy. The third was Manufactured Consensus. We looked at 26 fake accounts and how they influenced. We manually counted how many other accounts they influenced. Almost 3 million others, right? Once we published this propaganda war series, I wrote 2 of those 3 parts. We were inundated. I had an average of 90 hate messages per hour. And that's when I realized, oh my God, this is a new weapon. And when we began collecting data and looking at the data, we also found that women were targeted 10 times, at least 10 times more than men.
Let me just briefly touch on this cyber libel that you are being charged under this time and have been convicted. Can you explain what that is? It's part of this kind of wider phenomenon of fake news legislation that we're seeing, where governments around the world are trying to say that legitimate journalism is somehow propaganda, is somehow libelous.
Yes, this is correct. Unfortunately, the cyber libel law was enacted into law in 2012, so earlier than this administration. But let me just point out 2 things. The story we published was published before this law had been enacted. So it's a retroactive application of the law. In order to perform the legal acrobatics to even get this case to court, they actually did 2 major legal moves that will impact every Filipino. The first is they changed the statute of limitations for libel from 1 year to 12 years. 1 year to 12 years, right? That was the first. The second is huge. Um, in 2014, so 2 years after we published the story, someone in Rappler saw there was a typographical error. One letter in one word was changed. Based on that, the Judge Montesa said, well, that's republication, and now you can be tried retroactively under the cybercrime law. So essentially, because someone's a grammar Nazi in Rappler, I and Ray Santos can go to jail for up to 6 years. Of course, these are some of the main issues we'll be challenging. They weren't really addressed in the verdict at all. And here's the kicker. The government's own lawyers, the cybercrime division of what our equivalent of the FBI, threw this case out precisely because the statute of limitations had ended. I'm just shocked.
And throughout this, it's been getting a lot of attention. I want to ask you, first of all, about a lot of the support that you've received around the world. Your lawyer is pretty well known herself, Amal Clooney. How did that come about? How did she and you link up for this?
A year ago, in April of 2019, the Clooney Foundation asked me to be one of the panelists at the launch of Trial Watch, which are court observers. It's precisely set up for when journalists or human rights activists when the law is weaponized against them. We met upstairs in the dean's office. I think it was at Columbia Law School. And Amal immediately takes the chair behind the desk, and starts outlining, Maria, this is what's going to happen. And at that point, she was negotiating with the Myanmar government to release the Reuters journalists, right? And we had just gotten news that the government had taken a hardline stance. But at that point, she said that they would be released within 2 weeks. And, she was right? So anyway, she lays out what's about to happen to me. And that's also part of the reason that particular day was very important in terms of
understanding. I want to ask you, because she now is asking the U.S. government to take action to protect you as a U.S. citizen, because you are a U.S. citizen. Have you been given any indication that the U.S. government will intervene? What would you like to see them do, briefly?
It's really hard for me to say that, because anything I tell you will be used against me by the Philippine government. I think that everyone who cares about freedom and democracy, governments in particular, should be standing up, because not enough governments are talking about the values behind democracy, right? Everything has become situational. And the worst case, of course, is, the reaction to the death of Jamal Khashoggi. So it's hard for me to say. I don't know where help will come from, but I have been surprised by the outpouring of support. But simultaneously to that, I am being attacked and clobbered on social media. The government has launched a very coordinated campaign along with journalists and former journalists who are allied with the government. So I'm
what does that look like?
Away all the lies.
What does that look like, practically speaking? Just for someone who might never face that, and I hope that most people don't. When you open your mentions, what is there?
Maybe in the morning, about 150. I can't even count them sometimes. But on Twitter, it's easier because these are newly formed accounts, and it's very easy to block. Facebook is difficult because their definition of inciting to hate is very different, right? When you say a lie in 2016, and then every year it keeps recurring, you say it exponentially in 2016, people believe it, right? So it's like a virus. They introduced the virus in 2016. The target are real people who begin to believe it. And even if you fact check those real people, they don't believe the facts. So I think this is the battle for truth. The other thing is, this is also very personal. You will never see everything I see because it's very targeted to me. And that's part of the reason I'm appealing to Facebook. Stop stripping away the protections that are guaranteed in the Philippine Constitution. Start moderating this. It isn't our responsibility to protect ourselves on your platform. They should make sure that users are protected.
We only have a few minutes left, and I want to put this into a wider context and get your thoughts. This moment, we are seeing the press facing unprecedented pressures. Journalists are being targeted all over the world, as you've mentioned, from the brazen murder of Jamal Khashoggi by the Saudi government, as you mentioned, to the killing of journalists in Mexico. I think there's almost 40 this year by the drug gangs, to the threats here in the United States that journalists are facing. What is happening to you is part of a larger narrative, is it not?
The same thing is happening to all of us around the world. And let me just simplify that, right? Our information ecosystem has fundamentally changed. Journalists are no longer the gatekeepers. The tech platforms have taken that, but they've abdicated responsibility for the facts. And so now lies laced with anger and hate spread faster than facts, which are really boring. We spend our entire careers learning how to make them interesting, right? To tell good stories. When you have facts, when facts are debatable, when people can't agree on the facts, you cannot have integrity of markets, integrity of elections, your elections coming up. And you can't have democracy. I think the last thing I'd say, so we're attacked bottom up. And then when the leaders who were enabled, who were elected because of these platforms, are now coming top down, journalists are being sandwiched and people are believing the lies. There are two reasons why those lies have impact. Because they're targeted to you, you doubt yourself. That's the first step. Doubt yourself. Your credibility is eroded when other people see it, right? But the first part is pound you to silence. The second part is create a bandwagon effect, a fake bandwagon effect, so that other people are convinced. There's almost a dictator's playbook. We know in the US, let me talk about the US. We already know from the Mueller report and from the US Senate Intelligence Committee that released the data that Americans were targeted by Russian disinformation networks, right? That's documented. And one of the fracture lines of society that they targeted, these disinformation networks of the IRA and the GRU, the military intelligence, was Black Lives Matter, right? They targeted it on both sides. That hasn't stopped, and it has affected real people. Fast forward 4 years, and here you are in the United States, right? Leaders, instead of healing divisions, pound them open, supported by exponential attacks on social media that play to the worst of human nature. This has to stop because we will lose democracy.
That's Maria Ressa. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Thank you.
And good luck.